Farm4Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm4Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm4Profit Podcast.
And listeners, welcome back to the Farm4Profit Podcast. You got Tanner and Dave.
Yeah.
I almost called myself Corey.
Uh-huh.
Man, I don't know how I feel about that.
Just a little bromance there? Or what?
No, that just is. I'm just always thinking about him, apparently. No,
Yeah.
Listeners, thank you for hanging out with us. We appreciate all the suggestions. This one's going to come and tie into a lot of the questions that we get. Not directly, Dave, but I think there's going to be a lot of value brought out of this episode. I love having our studio, and I love having guests in the studio.
Yeah.
I know that you and your wife have a cow-calf herd.
Yep.
How often do you take a calf to fat?
We don't necessarily. We give it to
Right.
the father-in-law, and then the father-in-law takes it to fat. And then he sells quarters or halves or whatnot.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happens. But a lot of ours, if they're ornery, they get their head chopped off right away because we're show cattle, so they have to be very, very docile. We breed for docility.
Yeah.
So.
But this conversation, I think, is going to enlighten a lot of our cattle producers, and I hope it brings a bunch of value to those that don't have cattle and are curious about the industry and maybe looking to invest a little bit and diversifying their operations. So it's our pleasure today to have Chad Tentinger here, who's a fourth-generation cattle farmer, originally from Northwest Iowa, but still calls the state of Iowa home. Welcome to the studio.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me today, guys.
We've got a lot to talk about, and we're going to talk about so many different aspects of your farming life. But ultimately, we're going to get into a new cooperative. So let's start off first with...
Chad, before we start, let's get right into just your background. What's your tie to agriculture? Fourth generation, tell us more. Married, kids, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so grew up in Northwest Iowa,
Okay.
up around the Marcus Claiborne area, Remsen area. My family's been in Remsen, Iowa since the late 1800s.
Okay.
Right in a farm, right in town, basically. So I grew up around there, always farmed, grew up in the 80s farm crisis when we were little kids and saw all that. And, you know, everybody told us we shouldn't farm. But
So row crop or cattle at that time?
row crop and cattle, we've always, and hogs.
Okay.
Back then, it was a very traditional farm, right? You get a few hundred acres of row crop, fair to finish hogs, and finish cattle.
Gotcha.
So as we got older, we did get out of the hogs sometime about the time we graduated high school. A little after that, the farrow to finish, you know, that had moved beyond us. We didn't modernize those facilities, so we got out of that. And we really focused on cattle and expanded our cattle operation at that point.
Gotcha. Tanner, when do you think it stopped being, my father-in-law was the same way. They had cattle, they had hogs, they had row crop. But every person picked a direction, I felt like. Was that the 80s? They either went row crop, they either went swine and went more integrated, or they went cattle and they're still cow-calf today.
I think it was right after the 80s farm crisis. I mean, my family heritage, Dad chose to go farrow to finish in 87
Okay.
and did that for 30 years. But, you know, before that, Grandpa had cattle and he had hogs. I mean, we had the farrowing barn and we had the fat cattle. We called the cattle shed. So it was, again, the typical crops, cattle, hogs. Make sure that one paid the mortgage and the others kept you afloat.
So, Chad, after the 80s, did you go to college for animal science or something, or was that like
I
the
did
dream
not.
to be a vet like every other animal science student?
No, what we did, you know, we were always planning on working on the farm and going forward that way. So
Okay.
we never went to college, me nor my brother that stayed back and farmed. So
Okay.
we just went to work. And, you know, with farming, I've often pointed out to a lot of people, you know, you live it, you're immersed in it every day. So by the time you graduate high school, you
You're ready
either
to
get
go.
it or you don't.
Yep.
So,
I like it.
You know, the best teachers are the ones every day showing you. So we just stuck it out and did that. And over the course of time, that's when I branched out into construction and other things to make sure that the farm would work.
Yeah, very good.
So then you jumped into founding TenCorp.
Yeah. So around 2007, I'd made a few decisions and we, you know, had to expand, had to do different things. You know, people kind of forget farming didn't get really too good after the farm crisis till early 2000s into 2005, right? And then it kind of accelerated. But at that point in time, I was getting married and I decided to make some changes and I started TenCorp. And TenCorp at its core is a cattle company, right?
Okay.
It's a construction company. We've specialized in, but it's always agriculture. We've done a lot of cement pouring. Back in the early days, I started the company right after they passed the law that all 1,000 head cattle operations had to have a lagoon.
So CAFO or an AFO to the layperson. Yeah, and we interviewed Bill, right?
Yeah, I had it pulled up here. So we talked with Bill from,
Yes,
he's your
from
vice
TenCorp.
president from TenCorp.
Correct.
It was April 17th, 2023, episode 273. And that episode, Dave, still sits in our top 10 most
There you go.
downloaded episodes.
Oh, people
So
want to
we
hear
did a good
cattle.
job.
People want to hear cattle.
It was a good show talking about
great.
kind of, the ins and the outs of what cattle buildings are, how they evolved to the way they are, the amount of technology that goes into the design, and how that helps the rate of gain and profitability ultimately.
Well, on the cattle confinements, the barns, that we refer to here is, I'm a firm believer the farm crisis never happened. They were starting to experiment with cattle buildings back in the late 70s, early 80s. They were expensive, but they worked for, especially Northwest Iowa. We had the mud, we had the conditions, the weather.
I got you.
By the time we came out of the farm crisis, there was no money. Obviously, we went back to the old way, and it took another 25, 30 years. And I think the reason most guys decide to either go hogs or cattle, hogs were modernizing. The barns were available. The technology was there. It was a clear direction. It took another 15 years for us on the cattle side to catch up, say, hey, we need to put these under roof. We need to get them out of the mud. We need to control our weather. And that's really where the heart of it was. So we started with digging lagoons, quickly transitioned into just pouring a lot of feedlot cement. And after a few years, my brother and I, we needed a cattle barn. We decided that was the way to go.
Yep.
At the time, we were looking at bed packs to be point blank because that seemed to be the popular item. We decided not to go down that path because we felt we had a lot of cement already on our outdoor lots. So we were controlling the mud. We were bedding on cement. We didn't want to create that same situation under roof.
Okay.
So we decided to put the pit underneath of it, capture the manure, utilize it better, and keep in time in that time frame, they came out with rubber mats, which really revolutionized the barn industry.
Okay, so explain what's the importance of the rubber.
So the rubber it's a nice soft cushion for the animal's feet, their hooves, safety. It's no different than dirt or bedding pack, right? They have to have something softer. If you raise cattle on cement 24/7, only hard concrete, you have more foot issues. The rubber it created better traction for the cattle and a softer cushion. I can tell you, just ourselves walking the cattle, walking the pens, when you go from walking on concrete all day to on a rubber mat, what it does for us, it does the same for the cattle.
Well, you think about that. We've toured a lot of our partners' facilities. You think of Sucut Manufacturing
Yep.
as one, and where an employee is going to stand for a long period of time, they've got a mat to stand on. It has nothing to do with just animals. It's all about comfort and the benefits of what being comfortable can do to livelihood.
Well, and husbandry for animals.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, listen, everybody knows in the cattle industry, if you have an animal that gets a hurt foot or a sore foot, your number one item now is, can I break even on that animal? Right? The profit side's probably gone. Now we just want to maintain. And once they go downhill with a foot, we all know where it leads. So, we even TenCorp spent a lot of time and energy really working on the mats. We developed a mat with another company that we just really thick with a lot of cushion that has a long lifespan. And I think we've got probably the first mat on the market that we think will last 15 years because we've got them in for 5 to 6 years showing no wear.
Yeah, so your experience in the cattle industry all these years is what led us into our conversation today. And you just talked about how we're worried about breaking even on a calf just because it has a foot issue. And that's how tight margins are.
Yep.
We make great money at times as a cattle producer, and we don't make great money at other times. And what you've got figured out here is hopefully a way to kind of level that out and maximize the opportunity. So tell us a little bit about what you've got going.
So Legacy Beef Co-op is the idea that we need to come together as cattle feeders. So we have a little more leverage working together. We have buying power, feeding 1,000 head of cattle, what you purchase on a day-to-day basis, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's feed supplements, whatever it is, you're priced at 1,000 head a year. If you have 500,000 head of cattle put together, your pricing model changed quite drastically. Now you have the pricing model of the largest feedlots in the world working to your advantage. Legacy Beef Co-op is formed to be the delivery mechanism of the cattle to Cattlemen's Heritage, a plant that's being built outside of Council Bluffs that Legacy Beef Co-op will own roughly 20% of that company also. So we're working together with the cattle producer to deliver cattle, create more opportunity working together while staying independent, which is a pretty important thing for all cattle feeders. We want to be independent, but we can work together. Deliver the cattle through a plant that we have ownership in, and then receive profits out of the back side of the plant as well on the front side. A few ways we're doing that. On the front side, when we deliver cattle from the co-op, we're going to tie our grid model, our pricing, what we're going to buy the cattle for will be tied directly to the boxed beef cutout versus the CME. I think anybody that's been in the game very long can think of a few reasons pretty quick, but the CME obviously on live cattle goes up and down at a whim. Any rumor in the market, now we have computer algorithms trading positions. It changes the game for us. It went from what I would argue 10 years ago was probably still a fundamental market based on fundamentals to today is more of a rumor market that ebbs and flows based on funds management. When the contrary to that is the boxed beef cutout is USDA reported twice a day, true numbers, you can't gamble on it. It's a true value of the product being sold into the wholesale and retail system out of the back door of the plants. So our concept is really simple. Let's tie our pricing mechanism to that. Everybody understands that a plant has to make a profit, has to cover its investment cost, it has to operate. But beyond that, there's money there to be shared back and forth and can be tied to a reasonable number and expectation. And one of the things that we've found, got endless research, but an interesting fact is that if you go back to 2004 to 2013, the average difference between buying cattle, our dressed cattle we were selling, and the boxed beef cutout, choice cutout, was just give or take $5 a hundred, $4.94. Then you go from 2014 to 2023, the average was $30.36. That's a $25 difference in a 10-year span that we as producers have not participated in that difference. There's some big black swan events in there, fair enough, right? There was a COVID that really erupted the market, but at the same time during COVID, the CME went down because we couldn't get our cattle through the plants fast enough, while boxed beef hit all-time highs of 400. In our model, we would have been being paid, still tied off that boxed beef cutout, so it wouldn't have been an artificial just going down. More recently, what we just saw is, the avian flu, right? Not in the beef herd, by the way, which is a pretty important fact. It's in a few dairy cattle that it's not going to kill. It doesn't affect the milk. It doesn't affect the people, right? If you get it, you're going to be fine.
Right.
The cattle are going to be fine. But it took the market in the month of March, the Board of Trade went down $8. All the same time, the boxed beef cutout stayed exactly the same.
Flat.
And what that tells us is no consumer was out there paying less to buy meat because they were worried about it. But what it does show us is in a world where computers trade the market, they can use that to ebb and flow profits into their system based on rumors. And the fundamental basis of Legacy Co-op is we buy our cattle on a fundamental market. Hundreds of sale barns across the country every week sell cattle. We go there to buy our feeder cattle and we bring them home and put them on feed. That is a true fundamental market. We paid the most that day of anybody else. But when we go to sell our cattle, we are tied to something that outside sources can gamble on and basically determine what we're going to get paid for our cattle. That's where we look at it very differently. Now, I'd put my hat on as a producer, and I look at the big companies out there, and I want to be real clear about this. I'm not anti-big packing. They're an essential part of this structure that we have. All these cattle that have to be processed have to get through the system.
How do you determine what big packing is? How many head? What's the number?
There's 4 big companies out there that everybody knows by name that can, they have about 80 to 83% of all the production, right? Yep. So those companies, I'm not against those guys. They take up all that volume. If one of them is out of the market, we are in trouble as an industry. There's not enough small plants that are going to take it up. Cattleman's Heritage is going to be at 2,000 head a day processing.
Okay.
That's going to be 1.5%. So you realize how many plants would have to be built. But when you look at their model, if I put my producer cap on, I say, well, gosh, they made excessive profits for a decade, and I didn't. But I assure you, if I was a major shareholder to one of those companies, that's just doing business. Well, I'm not against that. the fundamental basis of this is the cattle producer has to understand, if we want to be part of what we consider excessive profits on the other side, then we have to be the shareholders. We have to own the company. We have to participate in that. Because otherwise, if you look at a big public traded company, their responsibility is to their shareholders. We are a supply chain.
The largest margin that they can of profitability.
That is exactly right. That is their fiduciary responsibility at the highest level.
How are you going to compete with the politics? I'm just curious, as Legacy Beef Co-op and their the guys that I know started this plant in Omaha because they were sick of the big four. But I have a friend down in Missouri that started his own plant, and he wanted to get in Fairway, and he wanted to get in Hy-Vee's and the local Safe Foods, et cetera, and they basically said, I'm sorry, we can't. Why? Because they were told by the big four that if they didn't oust this guy, if you will, then then they would lose their contract. Well, they can't afford to lose the big contract. So there's a bit of politics in play there and shuffling around. Is Legacy Beef Co-op and the production plant, Cattleman's Heritage, is it big enough to compete?
That's the key to it. It's volume, right? If you're talking a load a day, 2 loads a day, and you want to get into the local, I get that. And in theory, like, why wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Well, when you are trying to supply one store, maybe 2 stores, and you can't even get all their beef, that's a difficult thing for a food chain to say, well, we'll give you 1 or 2 of our stores and not the rest. Yeah. So if you're one of the big companies, you're going to say, well, we want to be in all of them or none of them.
Yep.
I kind of get that, understand that play from their point of view.
Yep.
At our level, we'll have enough beef that we will be able to participate at a high level.
Okay.
That's a key to it. The other thing is, on Cattleman's Heritage, we've been working on that for a couple years, developing the business plan, the model. We have had over 80 companies worldwide reach out to buy the beef. Selling the high-quality product out of the Midwest is not an issue. You just have to have some volume. And 2,000 head a day is where we're at, so 520,000 head a year. That's volume. Enters a marketplace. The other thing that we look at in the future, maybe not, who knows, but there's other independents that are regional that are starting up. I would be a little bit surprised if someday there's not working together as independents to meet market demands, right?
More of a franchise type.
For sure.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, guys, right now, the core of Cattleman's when we started this was, at the height of our cattle cycle, there's not enough capacity in this country. We were maxed out. We were sitting at 99%. Holcomb, Kansas has a fire.
Yep.
Tanks our market because they can't get cattle through them.
Yeah.
So now everybody's looking at it today. You could say, well, the packing industry is probably running 85%. Well, there's some room. Well, yeah, for the next year or two, but we're going to go back up in that cycle. I know you guys have talked about beef on dairy. That whole cycle's coming in a big way. There's going to be more cattle, more production cattle for sure, and we're going to need to be able to have the capacity to handle it and have some room on it. Because if one of the big plants decide to exit, if they exit today, it crashes our market.
Even if they decide to remodel.
That's it.
And lower capacity, because that's one of the headlines that I've followed is you can't stop.
You can't stop. If the big packers decided today, you know, what we're doing is new technology, new advanced technology, it really helps a lot. There's a lot of benefits to that. If one of the big guys said today, we're going to take 3 plants offline, retrofit it all so we can be better, the investigations would never stop. It would crash our market. It'd be market manipulation, all of this.
Yeah.
It can't happen. And by the way, they have a system that's worked for 100 years.
Sure.
They're not incentivized to change it because we as a supply chain are beholden to whatever the market dictates on the CME. Where in our model, we're going to be operating a plant of 2,000 head a day. And a traditional plant would take 1,200 employees. In our plant, using new technology, takes 800. So if you just do some quick math on 400 employees annually, that's give or take $25 million in payroll. That's $50 per head cost advantage in production right there, just on labor.
Just to start. And I want to go back to the comment you made about how the producer has the opportunity to sell at a higher price going into the plant and get some profits on the backside. Yeah. You're tying it to the boxed beef. Can a producer today sell to any packing house and tie their price of cattle to the price of boxed beef?
No, not that I know of. All grid models are still based on the CME. That's the fundamental basis, whether it's dressed or full grid, it's based off of that. Yep. Now, it has a reflection. Once boxed beef comes down to a certain point, we always get to participate in the downturns. Sure. Boxed beef comes down, we go down.
Yeah.
And I don't have any problem participating in the downside as long as I get the opportunity to participate in the upside. But when boxed beef goes right back up, well, my bid didn't jump $5. So we get all downside pressure,
right,
and we don't get the upside pressure.
So for our listeners that don't have the experience, then what does it mean today if our producers are selling in the meat?
You're still tied to its addressed price. It's based on dressed. It'd be based more on carcass side yield and grade versus the whole. So it's addressed price that is still tied to the CME that day. All they do is take the calculation. If the board's sitting at $1.80, they calculate it to address price at a percentage of yield.
So it's the hanging weight versus the live weight.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's
Otherwise,
exactly
the price is determined based upon the CME, both categories.
Both categories. And then if you say I'm going to sell in a full grid, you can sell it just on yield in the beef, or you can sell it on a full grid. And when you sell on a full grid, then they take every animal, how much prime, how much choice, evaluate all that. But we're in a weird spot right now. We have a lot of big cattle. You take quite a hit for 4s and 5s, which means there's more fat, different style that way. But at the same time, the fat and tallow has become worth gold in the secondary market and rendering and aviation. So, when you dive into the numbers, those discounts don't always make sense. But again, there's a business model out there that's been around for a long time, and that's just the way it is. And if you want that business model to change, you're going to have to be a shareholder in the company that changes it.
So I get the opportunity to sell the livestock market, and there's order buyers there from the big four, if you will, that are there. Is your group going to come and bid at an auction too to get cattle that way? Because Tanner, you imagine you're trying to grade them as they walk through the ring for 10 seconds, and are they prime, are they choice, are they cutters, are they canters, are they what are they that are running through the ring, and you have all of 10 seconds to, and then what's the market going to be by the time we have shrink? It's going to get hauled. Where's it going to get hauled to? Green Bay, Omaha, etc., and make all that decisions in a split second, and then buy in a competitive bidding atmosphere. I didn't know if you guys would be in that competitive bidding.
How are you getting your cattle?
We don't intend to. So that's Legacy Co-op, right? Legacy Co-op will sell 525,000 shares. Each share represents one shackle. So if you wanted to deliver 1,000 head of cattle into the plant, you'd buy 1,000 shares. You have 1,000 head delivery every year. So we're going to get all our cattle from the co-op members. And the co-op members will deliver their cattle based on the grid that we talked about that's tied to the Boxed Beef Cutout. So it's a better representation of the market, of fundamentals of the market. And they'll also own 20% of the entire company. So you have a way to make money on the front door, at least a more fair mechanism, and then you also share in the profits on the back end.
So who owns Legacy Beef Co-op?
Right now, the co-op members will, right? So right now we have a board. We are building it, the co-op. So a co-op has a board that directs it, but the members own a co-op. So every time you buy in, you will have a co-op membership. The co-op is set up as it's one vote for one unit. It's, there's traditional co-ops that no matter how many shares you own, it's still one vote, one member. We set it up more to, if you have 1,000 units, you'd have 1,000 votes in this model, right? So we just feel that's more fair. If you have a lot of delivery obligation, you want to sit at the table.
If you're going to bring a more of a large percentage of those cattle to get slaughtered, you should have more of a say.
You have more skin in the game.
So Tanner, I don't know if this model's ever been done. I mean, we think of like farm elevator co-ops.
Yeah.
Okay. Similar theory, and now we're talking cattle, just different commodity. What are our listeners saying right now? Naysayers. What are the naysayers saying?
It'll never work. It'll never work. You're never going to get 520,000 head committed from how many different family farms to keep this plant full.
Yep.
So what do you say back?
So when we say that is, Iowa right now ships 1 million head of cattle out of its borders every year to be processed right on the other side of the state lines into a system that we have no control over. So when we talk to producers, it's really clear the packers have the fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. If you want to participate in that level, you need to do it. The other thing that we point out is you're still independent. You're just coming together to work together. The interest level is here to have it done. And we can also point to the pork industry that has done this exact same thing and has been very successful doing it. If you look at companies like, Just over into Minnesota, there's a couple of them that are not, into Nebraska, there's a couple companies doing it right now on the pork side, right? It works very well. And there's models out there that show it, right? I mean, it's not that complicated. There's big feedlots that have 500,000-600,000 head of cattle, right? So the producers in the upper Midwest in this part of the region have to decide, do we want to participate in something like this, or just, a couple generations we might not be here, and there will be that 500,000 to 600,000 head feedlot that took our place.
So 2 questions then around 1 share equals 1 shackle. How long are we tied into this? Can we come and go?
You're committed every year for the rest of your life. Like, this is a long-term commitment, but it's like shares in anything. If I could go back in the ethanol industry and buy up all the shares at the first price, I'd go ahead and buy them all, right? So you'll be able to sell your shares down the road if you decide, I'm just out of the cattle business.
If I retire, I shut my barn down.
You can obviously pass them down to the next generation, or you can go out and you can sell them to other cattle producers.
So how many people are signed up so far?
So right now, we just started on Legacy Beef Co-op about a month ago. We're selling them in 5 rounds, 5 lettings. The first one is 60,000, and then half of them are sold today.
Gotcha.
Well, that's a good start.
It's a great start for literally, we've been really out there talking about for 3 weeks.
And then can I get in if I'm going to commit 2 head a year?
Yeah, we don't have a bottom side. I mean, when we're sitting at the kitchen table, we like to at least have a load. If you're going to load up a truck, let's bring a load. Right. But, this is designed for everybody. It's not designed that, you've got 5,000 head, so I'm going to give you another advantage or not, or whatever that looks like. This is, if you've got 40 head a year you want to deliver, buy 40 units.
Is there a top side?
There isn't. I mean, I think for the marketing side of this, what we're going to do as a company is market our family farms. We're going to tell our stories. I mean, the cattle feeder, the family farm out of the Midwest is possibly the best story to tell of anybody on any marketing plane. Everybody wants to know where their food's coming from, who's taking care of it, what the quality is, the animal husbandry, all that matters. We're offering all that. We can detail it. We can introduce you to the families that are participating in this. So that's the marketing. So when you ask, is there a top side? There's not a top side. But at a certain point in time, there's enough people that will have a marketing program that'll simply say, hey, our average producer is X, right? And I don't know, is that 500 head? Is that 1,000 head? I don't know.
How about price-wise? I'm guessing most of the guys that I'm thinking are still thinking price. They know what their price is now. What's the, you talked about how it's not tied to CME and it's tied to boxed beef, but markets are still go up. They still fluctuate up and down throughout. Is there I'm not trying to shoot a hole in it, but is there an average more that they're going to make than they would currently? Most of the stuff when we talk on Farm for Profit, it's, you make this much now. This is going to get you 8 more bushel per acre. This is going to make you X more dollars.
We try not to do that because everybody guarantees you 2 more bushel.
Yeah, correct. But is there an idea of what when is the juice worth the squeeze?
So I've got a graph here that we can share that if you go back into a traditional market, and we talk about the dress price, 61.3% of the boxed beef cutout would be an average. That was a traditional price of what our pricing mechanism would have been live cattle, 61.3%. So that would be an average. If you go back over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, it go 61.3%. It was in the last 3 weeks that we just matched up with what we've been being paid. And what part are we in right now? We're in the bottom of the cycle.
Yep.
For the tightest margins. If you go backwards in time, on this graph, per head space, there's probably $1,500 to $2,000 per head space in the last decade. So it's still an industry that's a margin market. It's still a live cattle situation. I'm not so bold to say that I can guarantee you won't lose money on cattle.
or to guarantee saying we're going to get you $50 a head more.
Yeah, but what we can show you in any chart, in any graph of numbers, USDA, not our numbers, these are reported numbers of the average over any decade, tied to boxed beef cutout, you are far
But it's
ahead.
not contracted like hogs, correct?
No.
So, hogs work because there's money made in the margins, Tanner. So we already know what we bought them for. We
And
know
they
what
also don't work.
We know what the cost is. I know they're not working right now, but normally the feeder, the operator, the integrator all have a contract, and they know it's X amount of dollars made on X amount of, they've kind of already done all the math on the front side. I didn't know if cattle ever get to that, if this takes it to that level, or we're still basing it on a market of some sort, not necessarily having it all planned out beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there'll still be opportunity for the producer out there listening that says, I still like to use the board. If I think I can hedge, I'd like to hedge. You can still do that. You can still use the board to hedge your cattle, but when you sell them, you're going to be selling them off of a boxed beef index versus the CME. That's all.
Gotcha.
So if you make money on the board, you should, and you should take it. But I think most feeders, especially in live cattle, understand today that, boy, when all the fundamentals are showing that this should climb $5, so I'm going to take a little risk and maybe buy some cattle on the board. It just, avian flu comes along, tanks at $8. Now, why? There's nothing in my cattle that made a difference. There's nothing in my industry that made a difference. So anytime you're selling your product based on something that can be so easily changed by a rumor, we're in a dangerous spot. I mean, we used to call them black swan events. I don't think we can use that term anymore when they come every 6 months.
You're not wrong. Well, I want to hit a couple of quick questions back to the membership of the cooperative, because I know our listeners are going to have that mixed bag of they love or hate co-ops, and some have taken advantage of non-cooperative structures. But for you, so what if I don't own cattle? Can I still have a membership?
So right now, not in the co-op, you have to have a delivery obligation. So in theory, if you made a deal with a neighbor, you want to buy into the co-op and receive profits, make a deal, he's going to deliver on it. I mean, we wouldn't frown upon that, but it's probably not going to be a common thing.
Right. You'd have to make the obligation to have cattle delivered. I can't just go buy a share.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
You're committing. When you buy a share, you're committing to delivering on that.
Yep.
We are discussing right now, we haven't went wide with it yet. We know when you couple people together, you have a lot of bargaining power and buying power. That's a huge part of this whole deal. So we are going to come out with a class in the co-op in the next couple weeks that will fit that need. So you're a farmer, maybe you just want to get a better break on buying corn, buying chemical, because we'll be using the power for all this. There will be a non-delivery class in this co-op.
Okay.
It's just, it hasn't come out quite yet, but it's coming in the next couple weeks. But what it'll do is it'll give the opportunity to every farmer that wants to be part of this for any opportunity they can get on the buying side.
Even I'm thinking health insurance. I'm a member of a co-op for the land brokers co-op for selling farmland, but part of what they offer is a combined rate of health insurance. They also have combined rates, discount rates on some of the software, the mapping systems we use. I got to assume like implants or Ralgro reels or any of that you're going to buy in bulk.
Yeah, we just worked a pen of cattle last week to where there could be extreme value for somebody that's listening, even if they don't want to deliver the cattle, just in the buying power.
That's exactly right. I mean, it doesn't take long to save $20 a head on pharmaceutical and feed supplements, right, in a buying group. And then, again, think about anything a farmer would buy down the road. There would be advantages to that. So we're opening that class up, non-delivery. And we've priced this structure at a way. The way the co-op works today is the first 60,000 units are $125 a unit. So that's a one-time buy-in you're in for life. The way we're structured it is, there's a seed agreement. You sign a seed agreement, you put $25 down. That's your down payment to hold your place. Sometime late this year, we'll come out with a final security agreement that spells everything out down to the letter of exactly what you're involved in this co-op. If at that point in time, for any reason you're looking at it, or you just changed your mind on farming and you don't want to go forward with it, $15 would be refunded at that time. So your upfront total risk is $10 a head to have the opportunity to change the way we sell our cattle and feed our cattle and be in that system, right? The balance of that money will be due. It'll be spelled out in a security agreement that comes out late in this year. It'll be give or take 30 days away from groundbreaking of the plant, right? So everybody will know exactly when the balance is due. And that breaking ground on the plant is anticipated to be the spring of 25 right now. We have decided to make sure that the market looks on the upcycle. We want to make sure some heifers are retained. the market looks like the herd's going to grow back, and then we break ground so we can anticipate when the market starts full swing again.
So if you break ground in spring of 25, when are you operational?
Would be the end of 26.
Okay.
It's an 18-month build.
What about
And where's it at?
It is right outside of Council Bluffs in Mills County. The location of this is vital. It is right outside of a 1 million person metro.
Metro?
Right?
Yep.
There's a few things in the past when everybody knows everybody's heard of a plant that didn't make it, didn't work, something went wrong. Size matters. If you don't have volume, we covered that, right? Location. If you don't have the right location, you can never succeed. It's just you have got to be able to access cattle. You've got to be able to market your product out of there. We're sitting right on 29. You're sitting in a hub from Omaha to Des Moines to Kansas City to the Twin Cities, all this direct access. You have to have population.
Labor force, yeah.
Right now, because of where we are, there's also a thriving market in this, whether it's further processing or whatever it is in this market. So there's a lot of employee space there already. So we're in the right location. The other thing that you have to be concerned about is the right, capitalization, the realization of it. There's a lot of people that have proposed plants that have about half a budget. If you lie to yourself on the front side, there's no way it'll work on the back side. So we have spent 2 years with our business planning, making sure that the money's right. You can get through the startup cost. All those things are incorporated into the business model. So we have accounted for everything. We feel we have done everything we possibly can to mitigate the known risks in this space.
You're pulling cattle. I keep cutting you off. You're going to pull cattle out of Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, South Dakota, maybe even North Dakota?
Could, right? Our primary area would obviously be, a few hundred miles from the plant in any direction, but that's a pretty big swath. And when you think about that, the amount of cattle that are there today, and another thing that I want to always point out, everybody just assumes the business model that we're in today will just go on forever like it is. Well, you got to realize there's a lot of plants in the system today that the foundations were laid in the 30s and 40s of last century, and they've been added on to. There's going to be problems, and old tired plants will be shut down, whether it's next week, 3 years, 4 years. In Iowa right now, there's a few plants that obviously just shut down, not in beef, but that happened. Those plants will go by the wayside, and we have got to have new modern plants to go. Mm-hmm. The other thing that is a kind of a falsehood that people think about, well, if you ever decide to sell a plant, the value changes drastically. Well, if you're in a bad location that's not set up to handle anything, it hurts you a lot worse. That when you're in a spot that is prime, ready to be located, everything is going your way, you have an asset. You have a true asset in the land.
I'm not going to cut you off this time, but now you probably don't remember your question.
I do. I wrote it down.
You're up.
So in farmland, row crop farming, farmers can invest. They can just be a landowner, not the producer. Is there any way to be a non-producer portion of your organization here?
I think, the co-op side of it, the non-delivery side would be a good avenue going forward now. We had some earlier rounds on our seed money rounds and initial investment rounds that filled out pretty quickly, a year and a half ago when we were out. So right now we have no real avenue that we're looking at to bring in the individual
just
farmer
outside
producer that would want to invest, right? We close those rounds fairly early. But the co-op gets you in the same spot. If it's a non-delivery obligation, you're going to get to the same spot that you could have through just straight line investing.
Yeah, but that's a good point. Because if you don't get any benefit of buying in bulk, if you just wanted surely to make your dollar work.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I was thinking just rate of return, diversification. And that's what we had prior to the 80s. We had hogs, we had cattle, we had row crops. Well, now we have a lot of guys that are just row crop. How do they diversify back into, hog buildings? We know how they do that. Turkey buildings, we know how they do that. But can they get into cattle integration somehow?
Yeah.
And I think that would be the non-delivery obligation of the co-op would be great to do it. And I know, if you think of traditional co-op, there's people that have been around the farmer elevators forever, right? And the dividends don't pay out and all that stuff. Well, there's a lot of overhead in those operations. There's a lot of costs that go with that. When you think about the co-op we're forming we're just grouping together independent farmers. We're going to have some administrative, right? There's going to have to be somebody tracking. Mm-hmm. So there will be a payroll of some sort, fairly minimal, but there's no infrastructure. The plant's the infrastructure that you own. And if down the road there's a decision that made that thinks we can expand that to make it more profitable, right? That'll be an option that we'd look at. But you're not building bins, you're not building, silos, you're not building fertilizer sheds, you're not buying sprayers. All that money that will be kicked back into the co-op, outside of a very limited amount of administrative, will be kicked back to its members.
Mm-hmm. So are you thinking making a branded, a bigger brand? Like when you think tractors, you think John Deere. When you think podcast, you think Farm4Profit. When you think beef, you think
Cattleman's Heritage. That's what we're doing here, right? So when you go to the store right now, the grocery store, nobody goes in there when it comes to beef to buy a brand. Nobody. What we're looking at right now is we want Cattleman's Heritage to be that brand.
I gotcha.
We want you to know that it's coming from family farms. We want you to know it's high quality Midwest beef. We want you to know these attributes that come from it. When you think of what do you go to the store for, if somebody's buying something, it might be CAB, Certified Angus, right? So it's a black-hided animal. But a lot of people will go and just say, well, it was black-hided, so that's what I'm buying. Well, that's a pretty broad range. We're going to tighten that kind of mentality up and use it to really build a brand around Cattleman's Heritage. So when the co-op is buying into Cattleman's Heritage, you're not just owning a plant. You own a part of a company that's going to be branding your product, selling it at the highest levels, working at morning, noon, and night to find those high-value areas. What we also know is a big part of our marketing model is we know that there are things that we can do on the farm to create more value for our cattle. We just also know right now nobody will pay us for that.
Gotcha.
And I know as a producer, I'm doing everything I will do to create as much value that I will get paid for today.
Tanner, do you think this changes? I think of everything in the market. We got to have my kid wanted Nike Air Jordans. Okay, Air Jordan's been around a long time. Okay,
I saw an Air Jordan logo on a NASCAR uniform on a pit crew. Anyway, sorry.
So there we have brands that we associate with that we like to buy, and the better economic status we have, I think those brands become more important. So now I want a Maserati. Now I need a Corvette. Now I need to upgrade to the platinum version of that truck or the XYZ. Okay, so we have the opportunity to do that. But that's the 1%ers. Okay, so according to the government, that's 1% and above. So what happens to the other 99%? They're looking for the value bargain, the deal. Do you think that knowing where their beef comes from is important to them? Do they like? I can think of certain people. They don't really care where their shoes come from. They fit. They're comfortable. They don't care if they're Air Jordans. But the 1% really cared that they were Air Jordans. So now let's take it to a whole different market and bring it back to agriculture. I'm thinking of everybody that doesn't care if it was organically raised or if it's Angus. It's beef. I just need some for Hamburger Helper. How much of the market is that market versus the 1%er?
Yeah, I would feel it's got to be greater than the 1%er.
Yep.
But then again, just like Chad is telling us, their share of the market is going to be 1.5%.
1.5%.
So I mean, but it is. There's so much more that we've been hearing because around traceability.
Yeah.
The general market, more than 1%, wants to know where their food comes from because they've been scared by every documentary that comes out on Netflix, on what's being taught at colleges right now, on how further away the consumer is getting from the family farm. So is that going to be part of the brand? Is the storytelling of the members?
For sure. So I want to be clear on this, by the way. We as feeders are doing all this basically now anyway. So this isn't something that we have to say and go out, we got to go make another 10% on this product. If we're in the open market competing on the sales side, this all cash flows very well. I mean, these big companies got very, very big just on sales margins, right? We're in the same boat. What we're saying is, I don't know what a consumer will pay for traceability today, but what if they will pay 3%? Well, if they will, we will have the mechanism to pass it back to a producer.
Whatever happened to country of origin labeling?
Well, that's a complicated deal. First off, the U.S. isn't set up to handle it. The U.S., the USDA, they're not set up to track all that, trace all that. It's another burden, right? If you ask me, as a producer, do I think it should all be labeled? Yeah, I do, because I think it's important where we know where it comes from and what we're buying. And if it's labeled here, it should be here. I can tell you for what we're doing for the co-op and Cattlemen's Heritage, I would say I hope they never do it again, because every package we have will very proudly say made in the U.S., made in the Midwest, and here's the family that produced it. There's an opportunity here for us to be able to show that without anybody else telling us we have to.
I think that could be good, because I've heard stories, and I don't know how the Big Four works. Maybe you can explain deeper, but can they import cattle and then put them on and feed them out and then call them U.S. beef? Even though they came from Brazil or from
anything
somewhere
that's
else?
finished or processed in
Here.
the U.S.
Finished or processed. Doesn't even have to be fed here.
So
processed.
you can ship in boxes, further process it, and that's a product of the U.S.
See, that's what I thought. I thought that some of the Big Four was bringing in, other country cattle and then basically saying, yeah, it's U.S. beef. We processed it here. So that's where I do think that people wouldn't mind. But I don't know. I've had good steaks in other countries too. So.
Yes. The interesting part is I was in a Five Guys restaurant the other day, and of course they're the ones that have the picture on the wall that tells you where the French fries came from.
Yes, they do.
Where the potatoes came from that made the French fries. They don't say where the French fries came from, where the potatoes came from.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've ever seen the picture change in the Five Guys that I've been in and out of. So
yeah, they probably get it from the same.
But they obviously feel there's value in telling the story as to where their potatoes are coming
Well,
from.
remember when we talked with Machinery Pete, some of the highest value equipment that's out there, he said, is when we tell the story that, hey, this was Dad's, 4230, et cetera, et cetera. It was always shedded, et cetera. So tell the story. Is it just a trend we're in right now? Like, okay, we got it with cattle, we got it with combines, we got it with, French fries and potato chips. Or does that change 10 years from now? We talked about how they set the roots for this, back in the 30s. Maybe we're just setting the roots for the next 100 years that it's going to become so more important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're just going back in time as a consumer. We used to go to Main Street. We knew the people that ran the store. They were our neighbors. We shook hands. We bought product.
Yeah, you just
people
always
want to
got
get
your
back
half
to
a-
that.
Yeah, you always got your half a beef from the Millers. You
Yeah.
always got your half a hog from the
Absolutely.
Johnsons. Yeah.
I mean, again, I can't tell you. I've got 4 main things here that we're going to really focus on branding, right? There's traceability. Mm-hmm. We think there's a market there. Family Farm, the story of who we are, what we're doing. That is a great story that we have done the worst job possible telling, frankly. I mean, you guys are doing a great job getting that out. We just need to do more and more of that, right? The advanced technology, the cost savings we have in the plant that can be passed on. I mean, a lot of people have asked the question, well, how do you compete with the big forest plants? Well, you're asking the wrong question. How are these old, tired, inefficient plants going to compete with a new state-of-the-art plant when it's fully in production? That's not even a competition as far as dollars per cost. And then sustainability. I got a lot of moans on that one. Well, I don't know. I don't care. All that. I'm not getting into the political side of it. But if sometime down the road somebody is going to pay us, if they choose to pay us for a better, more sustainable product, I want to be in position to cash that check. That's my whole stance on it.
We here at Farm for Profit have, in the last 6 months, changed our definition of sustainability. We had an interview, and a guest told us that for him to have a sustainable farm, it has to be here tomorrow.
That's it.
So he's going to do all the practices that he can to make his operation exist tomorrow.
And you know what? All those 4 things I just named, I can't tell you today what the trend will be in the consumer side if they'll pay us for that. All I know is we're really doing all this anyway today. We're just not getting paid for it. So if we find a consumer that'll pay us for it, let's be in position. Yep. And if you look at what's going on in Europe right now, where they're really cracking down on production livestock and agriculture and changing their ways.
Well, that's how Huey made it over here. Huey be cool because they shut them down.
Yeah. So if you don't think there's going to be a huge market over there, Europe's not going to quit eating beef.
So how does the new facility? Did you see the TikTok with the hog building in China? That's like
it's 30 stories
tall, and it's like the Taj Mahal of hog buildings.
All I can think of is shit runs downhill.
The guy on the bottom's
30 floors of this.
They I don't know. They got it figured out. That's what I'm like picturing is this 30 floor.
This is a very simple deal. What we did was we went to the best makers of equipment in the industry today. Tried and true equipment. We laid out the most efficient floor you could lay out, and then we put a box over it. Part of the things we're doing, we would be considered a European, Australia, New Zealand style plant. The reason I say that is when you talk about labor savings, they hit their labor problems 20, 30 years ago. And where we're seeing it today, They've already been there. So we're not putting a single piece of equipment in this plant that's not tried and true. I made it crystal clear on day one. I won't be a proving ground. That will break you when you talk about problems, right? But the stuff that's been in existence for 20 years that they've been, fine-tuning, we incorporated that in the plant. And it goes back to what you mentioned earlier. Could you just take an old plant, retool it, shut it off and all that? Well, your box on the outside is not going to be the right size. It's not going to fit what you need. There would be nothing cheaper in doing it. In fact, it'd probably be more expensive, to be frank. I mean, if you're going to pay a couple $100 million for an old tire plant and then spend another $400 million redoing it, that's not going to work either. Mm-hmm. And it probably not in the right location.
Interesting.
Well, it failed before.
Yeah.
The whole cattle side, I can see it. I want to know more about how did you come up with a co-op and what are the challenges?
Well, the challenges of the co-op is just making sure that the producers understand what we're talking about here. Again, what I started in the beginning of this, we can't sit back any longer and complain about what we view as excessive profits being made in the packing industry if we're refusing to put our foot in that pool and receive those profits.
Yep.
This is nobody, and I mean nobody's ever going to let you share in profits if you don't share in ownership. I mean, if you've got somebody out there to do that, I'll go. I'd like to meet them because I'll sign up. No ownership, but I get all the profits. We are a supply side industry in the beef industry. Mm-hmm. We supply to the system.
Gotcha. Yep.
We need to expand into an ownership role on the backside to receive those profits.
That's a good one. I've just got one more question around the cooperative membership. One popped in my head while we were discussing that I want to know what else we missed. So if I am a member, I've committed shares, I've committed delivery. What happens if, I'm the guy that tries to always buy 7-weight steers and I can't get anything bought and all of a sudden I'm 60 days delayed?
Yeah.
Or I end up with something that has slowed my rate of gain. Is there a penalty if I can't deliver on July 4th or deliver?
No.
I was wondering that too.
That's a great question, and we've had that asked a lot, right? That's the obvious one. Well, if the day I buy cattle, you're telling me I got to deliver March 2nd, if I miss it, what happens? What we expect, because again, now we're not working at odds with each other, we're working together on the same plant. We'll have a co-op, just a really quick structure thing. We'll have a co-op board, we'll have a Cattlemen's Heritage board, and then we'll have a joint advisory board. So when you talk about working together across all aisles, that will exist. The co-op board will have seats on the plant's board. So again, full spectrum all the way through participating. Now to answer your question directly, because of that, what we are going to work on is, that. You bought those cattle and you have a projection time.
Sure, got an
now
idea.
You know something's going wrong. You don't find that out 6 months in. What's communication? Hey guys, I can't schedule my cattle there. Well, we can bring other cattle in. You come into a later date. It's about working together. And the way we're going to do that is there's a certain amount of units that will be sold to people that won't deliver. So we'll have some kind of an arbitrage system set up because we have, 520,000 head a year. If every single spot's full nonstop, it's complicated,
Right.
That's mind-boggling to figure that out.
I mean, we get buyers right now that call us saying, hey, we were a load short, or we need 4 loads. Can you send something?
Yep.
And we may not be wanting to, but they typically pay up.
So we'll have a certain percentage of producers that will be able to fill those voids, right? That there's some producers that deliver into the system 5 loads a week no matter what they're doing. They won't deliver all their cattle to us. We have that figured out.
Right.
There'll be an arbitrage system to work with it. But again, the expectation is right now, if I have that problem, the last person I'm calling is telling the packer that I got a problem with my cattle. I'm going to miss my timeline of when they should be done, because then they're going to look at it like, well, what's wrong? What's going on? Well, you're part of the system on all the fronts. Mm-hmm. You're getting paid on what you deliver. So if the quality is there when they deliver, it's not my business if it took you an extra 3-4 weeks. We will work with you to make sure that works.
Right. Tanner, I can only think of one more question. When you think of State Fair, all them campers that are up there. Well, people that want to get into that co-op, if you will, right? They want to get in, but they can't get in because it's full.
I know where you're going.
Right? So it's full. But you can will your spot to the next generation, or you can sell it. Same with Iowa State tickets or something like that if you have certain tickets. Can I buy into this? My kids decide they don't want to do anything. Can I sell it to him for a profit?
Well, you own the shares.
Okay.
You own them. So how we anticipate setting that up, we think we'll always want the co-op members to have right of first refusal. But that being said, it will be at the market value of that day. So if they double in value, that's your price.
Yeah, an existing member can't say, I want in at the price you bought them
Exactly
for.
right.
Okay.
This is true value of the share will be there. If because it's a co-op, the co-op board will have overall guidance on that. But typically how you see that is if you want out, if you're selling them to your family, maybe not willing them down, but maybe you've got a nephew that's coming in, you want to sell them to that. I think that's pretty understandable. What we're more concerned about is we just want to make certain that we want good, high quality cattle in the system so that we're dealing with that kind of relationship.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm out of questions. So
But it's a self-governing co-op. Keep that in mind, guys. So you're part of that. You got a seat at the board of the co-op. So that's not arbitrary rules set by somebody that you've never going to meet. You're part of the system to set your rules up.
Can foreign entities buy in?
No. I mean, we are on the co-op side, or right now we have no foreign investment on the co-op or the cattleman side. That being said, could there be a minor position somewhere? I don't know, but certainly not in the co-op because how are you going to deliver?
Yeah, that would be an expensive plan to ship beef over.
Yeah.
All right, but I guess they could buy
I mean,
calves.
I'm thinking market share. I'm just thinking monopoly. Because right now, your one shackle is your one whatever. Well, hey, let me sign a contract for all of them. I'm a majority shareholder because it's not one is one. It's not one is the same as everybody else's. So now this is why Montana gets less of a vote because they have less people than Delaware, right? Well, when we're talking electoral votes, it's kind of the same system. It's who's got the most cattle in the system.
Right.
Well, can I just buy in and outdo everybody else and then I'm the decision maker?
Well, you still have a board. I mean, you still have a board that's seated, so you're still, if the board says we're going to take this to a vote, a board still dictates a vote.
Yep.
And then if it goes to that point, and there's kind of an illusion about that, if you've ever sat on a board, we've all watched movies and TV, and you watch these, it's a lot of antics and yelling at each other and high power moves. Well, I've never been part of anything like that. Every board I've sat on is very boring, very minutia, going through the numbers, and you're trying to tweak it a little bit to make a margin. I mean, it's not high, it's not high business power things going on.
Gotcha.
Well, this has been fun. I've been engaged the whole time. I hope our listeners have also been engaged. I'm going to kind of try and summarize and then let you let us know if we missed something. But the question we've been asking all of our guests at the end of our shows is, what's the best food you've ever eaten and where did you get it from? So think about that as we go through the summary here. So we were hanging out with Chad. With Chad.
I've been called
Chad
worse.
Chad T. Or backwards, Tad.
I promise, I'm still here. And we learned a lot about the Legacy Beef Co-op. We learned a lot about what could potentially be a trend-setting beginning for the beef industry. We're talking about the co-op that will supply the beef to the Cattlemen's Heritage that's going to slaughter 520,000 cattle a year. It's going to be located in the Midwest, and the goal is to bring family farmers together, family cattle, ranchers, producers, farmers, everybody that wants a different title for what their operation looks like, to be able to participate on scale. The power of size is going to apply not only on the ability to get a better price tied to the boxed beef index as you bring it into the plant, but also is going to have 20% ownership of the packing plant, so you get it on the backside of the processing goes, plus the power of being able to purchase inputs as a collective group, being able to lower your cost of production, hopefully. One share in the beef co-op equals one delivered calf to the plant that year.
Yep.
It is a lifelong membership, and memberships can be transferred, whether they're sold, willed, or given to somebody else. Going to continue to work on the timeline of setting up this cooperative in the next couple of months. We're in the very early stages, first couple of weeks
Yes.
of getting members, and we'll hit the pricing and how they get signed up here in a little bit. But ultimately, the goal is to start breaking ground on the packing plant in the spring of 25 with a 18-month build to hopefully get that whole process up and running by the end of 2026. We know there's going to be a lot of obstacles between now and then, but when you work collectively as a co-op, you can overcome those all as a group. Ultimately, going to create a mechanism for cattle producers to hopefully farm for more profit and earn that opportunity to build wealth and the future of their farm. So high level on a lot of things there. Do we get it all covered today?
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, as cattle producers, as a producer, any farmer in the Midwest, right, we really value our independence, right? And that's been a lifelong thing. And because of that, I think we've been allowed, or been maybe manipulated is the wrong word, but down that path to thinking that I'm always working against you or my neighbor, so I can't get the same price point and all that. We need to realize there's a way to be completely independent and create a better opportunity for ourselves, and I think the co-op it is. In my entire lifetime, nobody has ever offered me in the cattle industry an opportunity to participate in something that levels the playing field for me and my family and generations to come. I think that's vital in this program. And really, when you break it down and the pricing model and all that, what's at risk is $10. If you don't like it, you walk away. It's $10 a head. Well, I will tell you this, every single time I've sold cattle in my entire life, I assume I left $10 on the table. It's a minor investment for an opportunity. That's all we're asking for. Take a look at it. If the opportunity fits you, we want to communicate. We want the right information out there. But everything we are working on, whether it's from TenCorp to Cattlemen's Heritage to the co-op, everything is working towards a better operation, helping people, helping family farms, and we want more family farms, not fewer.
So if you just had money, follow-up question, and you thought, I like this. Can I get with TenCorp, build me a cattle building, get with somebody else that maybe you have to manage that cattle building, then get with Cattlemen's Heritage and the co-op basically to market the beef for me, and I could just say pull the trigger?
Well, you absolutely could. I mean, right now I build a lot of cattle buildings that we do contracts.
Yep.
I think we're the only ones. Bill touched on that when he was here, right? We do 5-year contracts to keep them full. That's the same thing. Ultimately, I'm not guaranteeing that they're all my cattle in there, so I have a lot of people that are in a feed grouping network that come to me and say, I like what you're doing here. I like that. I would like to feed some cattle in these buildings and do all that. So we connect people, right?
Very
the
good.
goal of it is when a young family comes, I don't care if young, but young really hits it. Like they just want to stay on the farm. A story I tell all the time, not to go too long here, is when I grew up in the 80s, every parent told their kid, you can't farm. There's no money in it. You got to go do something. And it was legitimate. Nothing made money for year after year after year. It was depressed. Well, here we are in 2023, 2024, telling our kids again, well, you can't get into cattle. There's no money in it. Well, there's record money in it. So we're telling our kids, don't get in this because we're in a system that doesn't work for us anymore. Well, that's a shame. I'm here trying to say, no, all you guys should get in it. All the young men and women that want to be in this business should get in this business today. It's a great business to be in. We just got to get our foot in the door on the other side of it.
Like it.
Man, that's good. All right, so what's the best thing you've ever eaten, and where'd you get it from?
Boy, that's a lot to, when you start thinking about that. But I think my grandma Schrader, when I was a little kid, her German chocolate cake was the best thing ever. And I still, so whenever I come across it today,
my mouth's
anywhere.
watering. I don't even know Grandma. It's been a long time since I've had a slice of German chocolate. My dad would probably echo the same.
Yeah.
Big fan. I grew up with church league dart ball.
Oh, wow.
And, usually on your birthday during dart ball, you brought a treat or
What the
sandwiches.
heck is dart ball?
So it's a combination of baseball and throwing darts. It's a diamond. I should put a picture up on
All
Instagram
right,
for our
all right.
listeners. And you play baseball rules, throwing darts at the bases. Church league.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well, Chad, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for hanging out with us. If our listeners are curious and they want to inquire more about membership to the Legacy Beef Co-op, How do they do it?
So we've got a whole team working on this. So we'll put some names and numbers here, but Don Vasky, myself, Chad Tentinger. There is a website out there, Legacy Beef Co-op, that they can get to that will link to all the other sites and certainly have all our contact information on it.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, listeners. We appreciate you listening in as well. So until next time, have a good one.